I really, really do feel honored and humbled to be standing here, knowing what it has been like for me to be sitting there with you. And I'm excited because the topic that we have somewhat auspiciously and bravely put before us as the theme for the conference, right? Contemplative approaches in the diverse academic community. Inquiry, connection, creativity, and insight. This theme for the conference is one that is very near and dear to my heart, but I dare say actually many people's hearts in this room. And yet, this is a first opportunity for us to gather together and have that be the central theme of this particular conference. So it's exciting. It's really breathtaking to me in a certain way that all of you guys came out, right, with that theme. We put that call out, Dan and I somehow together, Dan and other members working together on the center of the board. We sort of decided we would try to do this, put the call out, and here you are. So really kudos to you. So thank you for being here. Before we get started, I actually just want to pass out a few cards and get Dan's help as well here. I want everybody to take one of these. There should be enough for one per person. Hang on to them because I'm going to invite you as I get going to use these cards to kind of jot down reactions, reflections, questions if you can. I just want to give you an opportunity for us to use this as you know, this is kind of a fixed space. It can't be entirely interactive, but to the degree that we can, I want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of react on these cards. Later in the evening, I'll collect them. Ultimately, I'm hoping that I can find some way to weave some of what I gleaned from some of your reactions into some aspect of the conference proceeding between now and the last day. But you'll see, I'll prompt you in particular ways as well. So just using the jot down whatever might come, but I'm going to prompt you in one particular way as we go as well. If nothing has come to you up until then hopefully something may come at that point. But it's really up to you. There's no pressure. This is not a graded activity. Okay. So again, good evening to everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Really, really genuinely mean that. All right, so as you know, as Dan underscored, as is on the PowerPoint behind me, the title I've chosen for my remarks tonight is Contemplating Race, Law, and Justice. Some notes, just a few ideas, some thoughts on pedagogy for changing the world. Yes, right? Yeah. Yes. All right. And this is because I chose that title deliberately because there really is no point in me standing up here talking about this topic, I feel, if I can't paint as broad a call to us at this time in our history, and it's been a long history of dealing with, grappling with, struggling with, being humbled by the challenges presented by the notion, the concept of race and all the stuff that goes around it. I, as a law professor, have chosen, I didn't have to, but I chose when I went to USF to focus on race and law as one of the different things I teach. I teach tort law, the personal injury, the medical malpractice, all that. I have 110 tort students who kind of had to meet with me twice on a Tuesday so I could be out here with you guys today. I normally teach them on Fridays. So I do medical malpractice, I've done insurance law, immigration law, I do a number of different things. I've co-developed a course on contemplative law. But this is an area which has been at the heart of why I decided to leave the practice of law and go into teaching. And so I've really wanted to kind of both continue to work on this vexing question of the interconnection between race and law, but to bring a contemplative dimension to that. And I've been doing that in my own ways over the years, and I'll share that as we go. So in many ways, what I'm going to offer then is going to summarize some of the things I've learned actually over the past 14 years teaching at the Jesuit University of San Francisco, and talking with now hundreds and hundreds of students, faculty, alums, staff, and other members of our community about this intersection. I've been teaching some version of a course on race and law since 1997. And now it's kind of evolved into two different seminars. One that really looks at race in American legal history, one that looks at more contemporary issues. So, you know, it was really too much information to try to do in one semester, and my students and the administration supported me in deepening our capacity by giving me these two different seminars on that. But we gather around the table, 14 to 22 second and third year law students, one of the most diverse law schools in the country, actually, the USF. Something like 40% of our first year class right now self-identifies as diverse in some way, racially or ethnically diverse in some way. And so we sit and we're exploring this topic, right? What is it about race that has been such a challenge to our country's basic core principles? Fairness, equality, liberty for all. How is it might a contemplative approach assist us in a deeper engagement with that question than it has been typically the case? A deeper, more satisfying, perhaps more transformative engagement with that question than is typically the case. So again, the idea is just to examine not only cases, right, traditional case law, but also concepts that are running through those cases, like race, like racism, like race-based privilege, citizenship, core concepts that have come up in law that have helped structure our thinking around race and actually structure inequalities that exist around race as well. Deep, heavy stuff, really heavy stuff. And in my experience so far, a contemplative approach has really assisted me in not shying away from the hard stuff by any means, but actually finding a way to hold the hard stuff and keep our hearts oriented toward each other, even if they're not completely open at every moment, but trying, right? Trying. And so that is what I want to talk to you about. Now, I want to say that right at the outset, I completely, totally recognize that race is just one of many different facets of this question of diversity in education. And I hesitate even to frame it as about race, given that I completely am aware of the way in which race intersects with just about every other thing. Citizenship status, religion, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability status, you name it. I recognize that to sort of pull out this concept is to, you know, kind of consciously put a little bit to one side a number of different aspects of people's experience that intersect inevitably with the concept. And so bear with me to the degree that I'm focusing more or less on race, although my comments are not going to be exclusively about that. Not always underscoring the way and extent to which it intersects with many other concepts, right? So it's all in there, but we only got an hour, right? So we'll do the best we can with those sorts of qualifications. So I've been examining both. When thinking about bringing a contemplative approach to this work, I've certainly been looking at both. Really reflecting on what we cover and bringing a contemplative approach to the notion of curricular development, but also how we cover it. And again, I'll describe in more detail what we do as we go, but again, it's not easy work. Increasingly, the majority of the students that I have had have actually not had much of a chance to do the kind of work we do around that table anywhere else. And I say increasingly, it's a little bit of a surprise to me to note that it is the case that over time, more recently, over the years, and I've taught this for 14 years, students seem more tongue-tied about this topic, not less. Or even more, in some ways more reticent to even talk about this. And that I'm not surprised by. We can talk about sort of the way in which color blindness as a theory and an aspiration is part of what's going on there. But the bottom line is this. We sit the students down, they're second and third year students in law school. They know they're going to go out and represent a very diverse population of clients in the real world, in California and beyond. And they know how they know from their own experience, from what they've been reading in the cases that they've studied, that this issue of race is still with us. And the law has not done the best job it might. They know because they're taking clients to clinics, juvenile justice clinics. They're supervising, right, their initial cases. They're having opportunities to go to these juvenile justice clinics. And they are disproportionately carrying cases focused on brown and black young people, Latino and African American young people, going into juvenile court that is so pervasively brown and black that there's one of my colleagues reports that one of her students reported that her young charge leaned over to the student at a certain point and said, "Where's the white juvenile court?" Where's the white juvenile court? Like, they just presume there must be somewhere. Clearly, you know, it's not the case that only black kids and brown kids are getting into trouble, but yet if you look around in those courtrooms, it looks that way. Why is that? Why is that? So that's the kind of question that my students, in real life problem, that my students know they're going to be facing. And so they come to classes like the classes I teach with a desire to have a little bit more support in really deepening their understanding of what those, you know, why those juvenile justice courtrooms look like that. And what they might be able to do as lawyers to minimize the likelihood that they'll look like that a generation from now. And again, given how long we've worked as a society to try to address these, they know they've got their work cut out for them. So I certainly believe that these practices that we together have convened to kind of deepen and bring more richly into our work as teachers and scholars really are an underappreciated technology for helping us deal with these issues wherever they come up. So I'm really heartened that this community has helped me have the courage to explore, to make a fool of myself, to try things, to sort of think out loud with my students, to really take risks in the interest of deepening their capacity to do better than was given to them with the challenges that they face. The implications, as I'll talk about for my students, appear to be profound, but even more intriguing in many ways is the possibility that what is going on in the seminars that I'm teaching around this, or co-facilitating, or learning from, even more intriguing than what's happening in those classes is what all of that seems to portend for me about the benefits that this kind of teaching and deep inquiry around hard topics suggests for education broadly, right? So not just in classes denominated race and law, but all of our classes, to the degree we want to assist our students in grappling with the hardest questions that befall them or that occur to them in those core classes, and also to be able to normalize conversations that include things like race, gender, and so on, that are often, in one way or another, put aside in classes that are not denominated this. You know, they're sort of often treated as if, well, you know, maybe you'll take a class on race where you'll think about that. Here we'll think about something else. I'm suggesting in this talk that we might do that differently, and that our students would benefit from our efforts in that regard, and so would the rest of the world. So in the following remarks, I'm going to try to do two things. The first main goal is to discuss how contemplative pedagogy and approaches to curriculum development have provided benefits to my students, again, in grappling with these complex problems. And I'm also then going to discuss how these types of inquiries, the kinds that I'm going to talk about that I'm doing in my class, the kinds I know you guys are going to spend the next couple days sharing about you're doing in your classes. How all of this taken together helps really tell a story of a reconceptualization of education. A huge project, right? How what we're seeing in our individual efforts around tough issues like this, and all of the ways that you guys are bringing your own work here, woven together really helps us see a reconceptualization of what education can be in the world that's kind of happening from the ground up through these efforts. So let me then put these two kind of goals or objectives of the talk on the board or on the slide here. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience with re-envisioning this particular course to include and enhance the learning experience for everyone using contemplative practices. Again, I know we're doing that in many different ways, and we're going to learn from each other so much. I can already, I'm already excited. Many people who are in the room, I know I saw earlier in the summer at the curriculum development workshop that we did, so I know you guys are committed to this work. So I'm looking forward to learning from all of you as well about this piece. How are we re-envisioning our classes to include and enhance learning for everyone using contemplative practices? And then again, how is it that we are telling a story about what this all means when we step back from the trees of our own work and we see the forest that's developed as a result of all of this great energy? How do we see this as a manifestation of a reconceptualization of education? And do we recognize the courage, right, that comes with that? And are we up to it? Or can we stand proudly, right, with that challenge and make the most of the opportunities presented by can I use the word chaos that's happening in education around us, right? The criticism, the challenge, the fear, the consternation, the great changes that everyone is predicting. All of that I see as presenting really, right, opportunity and crisis, two sides of the same coin, an opportunity for us to really articulate this reconceptualization that we obviously are here and about in profound ways. Okay, all right, so let's talk a little bit about this challenge, the first challenge. Transforming particular courses. Again, I've already briefly described how it is that a particular course that I've taught on race and law is my little sort of ground of exploration and experimentation for bringing contemplative pedagogy into the hardest crevices and cracks of the work that we're doing in the classes that we teach. I just want to say at the outset that for me, to talk about this, as I already alluded to, is to talk about social justice. It's a sort of a vision that I have that education always, to some degree or another, is inevitably about social justice, defined variously perhaps, granted. But certainly for me, there is a kind of an inherent justice in trying to help any individual develop their gifts and talents and use them for their best and highest in the world. So it's about social justice, it's about social change. And I just, think it's worth saying that I have a view that for social change to happen and to have any chance of having a lasting effect, it has to engage, folks at various levels. It has to be very comprehensive indeed. It has to engage the personal, the interpersonal, but the person in a context, in a world, right? So it has to also be aimed at looking at social, cultural, systemic issues, just to name a few of the aspects that I think intersect when we really talk about how do you make change happen, how do you make change stick. So in addition, I think as much as possible, and especially when we talk about an issue like diversity, difference, race, and law, anything we do, in light of what we've learned from sociologists, psychologists, and interdisciplinary understanding of these problems in the world, we know that we really, if we're going to really address these problems, we've got to be looking at these problems through a number of different lenses. What are the overt manifestations of these problems? What are the, on the one hand, overt, intentional, conscious manifestations of race still showing up in law, or race still showing up in our society in ways that the law wants to get involved. So hate crimes, we still have those, right? People bringing nooses and leaving them in people's office. This kind of thing still happens, and worse, right? So again, the obvious, and those are the ones that are in some ways easiest for law to grapple with. But the harder ones, again, that social scientists, psychologists, and other scholars in those fields have shown us are there, are the manifestations of these problems that are more covert, more unintentional, often unconscious, sometimes come about due to some sort of negligence or recklessness sort of thing. But here's where the law has often fallen short. Right? They've tended to just really look at the intentional, overt, covert, and if it's less, if the culpability level or standard is deemed to be less than intent or purposeful, the law has managed over the years to get more and more disinterested in really helping us as a society really get at the heart of those aspects of the problems. So I think when we talk about dealing with this issue in education and in our classes in various ways, we just have to recognize that all of those different levels of complexity are there. And that just heightens the challenge, right? We sort of do know all that's there. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of very well-meaning people find it hard to wade into these topics if they don't absolutely have to. Dan and I were talking last night about, we all know that feeling of like, oh my God, if it comes up, if I'm teaching my, my insurance law class, which I used to teach, haven't taught it in a little bit, but when I was teaching that class, if race comes up, it's like, okay, how much time, right, can I give to this topic? And race can come up in an insurance class in who knows how many different ways. Different types of insurance policies disproportionately sold or marketed, valuable and less valuable to different populations by zip code and the impact of that. That's just one example. Just one example. If it comes up, anything like that, how much time can I give it in the class when I have so much other stuff to do, right? So that natural human capacity to say, oh my gosh, if it comes up, when it's not on my lesson plan and I got a lot of other stuff to cover, and my gosh, it's all of this complexity anyway, isn't there a way I can move away from this one? Like Dan was saying, tell us how to move out of it, right? How do I get out of that thing if it comes up? That's what, often our colleagues might want to know. How can I kind of get out of that cleanly and gracefully without looking like I was trying to get out of it cleanly? So it's hard. It's hard. It is challenging. And yet, again, the fact that it's challenging, I think, should challenge us to bring our best game, to bring these practices that I think are core to our best game as human beings, to bring these practices to bear and to work together to use this wonderful, rich community to help each other gradually, because again, this doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen after a half-day workshop or a lunchtime talk on diversity. No. But to help each other gradually deepen our capacity, normalize this struggle together as teachers in the 21st century. So, again, I see part of our job in the 21st century is helping develop these kinds of practices into our curricula for the benefit of our students and the benefit of the society that really, again, has shown itself time and again over the centuries unable to deal with this as well as we might. So why shouldn't we bring these practices to bear as much as we can? Be thinking about what that means, what that really does mean. Be thinking about the level of commitment that requires on anybody who's going to teach before diverse bodies of students and somehow assist them in grappling with these issues better. So creating and experimenting is a word that I've already alluded to. I see the efforts in this regard as being about experimentation, being willing to make mistakes publicly, right? Leading a little bit sometimes with your heart, you know, your students, we know from experience before our students that they'll go a long ways with us if they know we care, right? And really minding their goodwill and their desire for change around these issues to the degree that it is popping up in the classroom. So creating and experimenting with this inclusive pedagogy is definitely what I've been about. And I put up here inviting multi-level change for good, partly because of my, second to the last time I taught this seminar, one of my students, who happened to be an African-American male and gay, told me afterwards, I've been changed for good by this class. Right? So I use that from his mouth, right, as a testimony to what I think this type of work can do. This is a picture from one of my classes. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I could almost expand it out. You could almost feel from the faces the kind of community that got created, that they created, by taking seriously this challenge to deeply engage with each other around these issues. And they are from all walks and colors and backgrounds of life. And they created the kind of community that helped them feel like they were better able to practice law in the 21st century with clients from all walks of life walking through the doors of California law firms because of the time and energy and support they gave each other through these classes. And so, again, I've seen a variety of different efforts work. I'll tell you a little bit more about the particular stuff that we do in this seminar. It was called Race, Law, and Policy then, partly because of the way in which this particular group and others helped me to see we needed more time, we needed more depth, and we could do well with that. It is, you know, again, divided up into two ways that I've described. But basically, the students write a paper on a chosen topic. They have come to realize this is one of the most rigorous courses they're going to take in law school. I've had them say in their third year, this is a class that finally helped me pull it all together, challenged me to think critically and in an integrated way across the range of issues I've seen over the course of law school. And I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And I learned to write better, right? And I feel like I learned to think better and communicate about things that matter to me better. So, what we do is we take a case, each class. Perhaps it might be a case like Grimm versus United States, which is a case which essentially insulated the police from constitutional criticism over racial profiling. Right? And this is a case that held essentially that any traffic offense committed by a driver, would be sufficient to justify probable cause and then search the car of the driver. This is the case, in other words, Grimm versus United States, that pretty much insulates cops from a wide range of criticisms around what's called racial profiling. Against African Americans, against immigrants, you name it. Would be suspected immigrants, you name it. Grimm versus United States, first case cited these days. So we read that case, as lawyers do. And then what happens in most law school classes, including generally the con law class where they first see this, is that they see it with 5 or 6 other cases really fast. Who has the time to really sit and grapple with what that case really means? What the justices said in their debates about it? Who the justices were that made what arguments, where they came from, and how this impacts real lives. Generally speaking, because the pace of most law classes, including my own on personal injury, it's really hard to create space around these profoundly challenging issues. But we do it in this race law class. We've got one case per 2-hour class, maybe 3-hour class, and then we're looking at all the issues that are germane to this question of justice and race that may be showing up in this particular case. We also read commentary about it by scholars who are, in this case, a Latino law professor who's also a dean of the law school, really trying to explain, stop a minute, let's understand what Grimm versus the United States is going to do to brown black people in America. So we read the case, we read commentary, again by a dean, a respected commentary scholar across the country with renown. But we also look at data, empirical data, statistics that help us put the case and its implications in greater context. Again, something you ordinarily do not have time to do in one of these classes. So we look at the data. We look at, for example, a study done by a Yale law professor, Ian Ayres, published in 2008, which examining all of the public data provided by the LA Police Department as one jurisdiction, a major jurisdiction, that had publicly tracked its stop and search profile sort of data, publicly tracked its records on that, and provided it to others to examine. This study showed that these disparities that were found in Los Angeles, extreme disparities, were not justified by legitimate policing practices, right? Because a lot of people will dismiss all of this by saying, well, those people must disproportionately be committing those crimes, right? The study didn't show it. In fact, the study showed that Black and Latinos tended to be less likely than the smaller number, much smaller number of whites who were stopped and searched in Los Angeles. The Black and Latinos, stopped in much greater numbers, were by significant numbers less likely than whites to be carrying weapons or drugs. And there's other data that show that the prevalence of various sorts of criminal or other, mal-occurrence behavior that we don't like happens across communities with relative frequency. So we don't necessarily, in terms of the occurrence of a variety of incidences and crimes, there is a lot of even distribution, but when it comes to policing, we see these spikes in different communities. So the data show, in other words, in the words of Professor Ayres, Black and brown men in Los Angeles were being overstopped, overfrisked, oversearched, and overarrested, but again, Rim versus United States makes this kind of unproblematic. So what do we do after looking at it with some depth? And again, we could do much more than a class on this, but it's much more than they normally get. We look at different contemplative practices, not only narrative practices, but a number of different contemplative practices to deepen the inquiry. We look at self-awareness practices, of course, the sort that a lot of you are using in your different classes, journaling, mindfulness moments, really pausing and reflecting. We talk about how to communicate with each other in ways that support each other in hearing the truth as it's coming up and communicating and hearing the truth of others. We tell our stories, speaking of hearing the truth. I often, at this point in the class, ask students to reflect on their own experiences around policing. And it's very common, right? I'll ask, how many have ever been pulled over for a traffic violation? Almost everybody raised their hand, right? I'll ask, how many, as a result of that stop, was subjected to a full search of the car, including the trunk, right? At that point, just about everybody's hand goes down, except the African-American men especially, and often, if there's any other minority woman in there whose hand is still up, it's mine. Because this happened to me on a highway in California, stopped for going like literally 3 miles above the speed limit, and they politely asked me if they could search my trunk. As a law professor, I knew I could say no, but then as a Southern woman and not wanting to run afoul, knowing that I didn't have anything in the trunk, I said yes. But again, just this kind of higher incidence of stopping and searching and frisking, or stopping and searching of the trunk, something that, again, disproportionately only the darker skinned people in the room have experienced. And then finally when I asked, all right, how many of you have had not only your car stopped, searched through the trunk, but also had a gun pulled on you and frisked? You think that's extreme enough that most of the students would say, none of us have had that, thank goodness. But often again, you've got, now my hand goes down, but the Black and brown male students in there, hands are up. They've had guns put in their faces. They've been thrown to the ground. This is a part of their experience in America now. And to sit across the table with each other and reckon with that truth is not easy stuff for a 20, 23, 24-year-old who's never really had a chance to reflect on what it might be like to live regularly in fear that you're just going to be taken, stopped, thrown to the ground. Oh, sorry, you know, not you. We're looking for somebody that maybe looks sort of like you. So really having that moment in which they sit and reflect on what that means, and then listening to a bit of the story of what that actually did mean to the students who carried those experiences with them. The tears that in a class like the one that I showed, where the culture of the class has allowed the truth to come up to that degree, to see the tears in these strong brown and black men's eyes about how this is impacting them. Well, it has an impact on all of the students. So we reflect then on what does all of this tell us about these concepts that we've been thinking about. Race, racism, citizenship, privilege. We really, really try to unpack what these basic experiences tell us. Not just reading the definitions, obviously, but through the lens, the deeper reflective lens, subjective knowing, truth, the truth-telling of our own stories, we are asking ourselves, what now do we know about these concepts that we didn't understand, and so on. And so, repeatedly, again, I see from that particular class the impact of having this commitment to a different way of teaching. I know not everybody teaches classes that offer these kinds of opportunities, and many people wouldn't want to, right? There's a lot coming up in classes like this. But I also know from hearing from my students that they wish more of their professors along the way could help them deal with these issues. They wish they had more of it well along the way. In fact, I had a second-year student come out of one of my classes, white, male, come out of my class last semester and say, my God, what we're doing, I feel like we should have been doing in the, in the 6th grade, the 8th grade, college, somewhere. We're just doing this. So this is why I think it's important for all of us, even those of us who obviously are not teaching classes like this, to really think about how whatever class that we're teaching or whatever co-curricular work that we're doing really might provide an opportunity for deeper exploration of the way that these kinds of issues may intersect with the core matters addressed by the curriculum or co-curricular activity. How is it that we may promote equal dignity and a broader, deeper commitment to a shared exploration where we all recognize we have a piece of the truth, a piece of some relevant experience around these issues. Every one of us, every person in this room has some piece, some story, something they know that they maybe haven't shared or reflected on that, again, if put together on the table, we might better really understand the whole and get our arms around the whole of these problems. Okay. So how do contemplative practices and how does contemplative inquiry help us? This is one of the places where I really did want to give you a moment to think about how, if in any way, race or other issues around difference, inequality, injustice of this sort might in some way come up in your curricular or co-curricular activities. And if it might, how might some kind of contemplative practice assist you in helping your students deal with it better?
Everything that you're saying to be very intriguing. I'm really curious as to whether you begin with an inquiry of the extent to which students understand what race is, what ethnic, what racism is, what ethnicism is, and whether you explore that at the beginning, and whether and to what extent you explore the definitions of everything that you do go on to explore in the course.
Thank you for that question. What's your name?
Pat Mercedes.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, we do spend time inquiring about definitions. Inquiring about the language that we use and that we generally use without much inquiry, right? We use without recognizing the ambiguity, the fact that when one person means race, they often mean this word, whereas another one will mean that. Some people think race and ethnicity are interchangeable. In fact, I sort of skipped over a component of that when I talked because I realized we don't have all night. We got to move through this. We got to get you guys in here. We got to use this opportunity to just do a little bit more inquiry as we're doing now. But yes, the answer is yes. Inquiry around what is race is really, actually, to be honest, that's like my key. That's like where I'm getting a lot of juice, if you will, right now.
Is it a biological definition?
Well, exactly, right? Or is it a social construction, some combination of stereotype, cultural learning, what people are making of the disparate criminal statistics and other constructing, right, information. How are we defining this thing called race? And to what degree are we often unconsciously kind of making it up as we go along, using it this way, sometimes this way, another, but usually, again, not having articulated for ourselves or for somebody else with whom we're having a conversation what exactly we mean by it. I think that's a huge piece of this. There's a lot of data out there for those of us who need data and want it, right? And I know it's a room of folks like that. But there is data that is showing now, first of all, that despite the fact that lots of social scientists and others consistently say race is a social construction, and here are the many ways that we construct it with stereotypes and this and that, right? It's out there. It's like the majority of scientists say this. Even the hard scientists, biologists, and others say, nope, there's not enough evidence in our field. Most of them, not all of them, right? Obviously, there's debate. But the majority now are saying there's actually not enough in biology or anthropology. You can look at the statement of the American Anthropological Association. It's on their website right now that says race is not an anthropological, it is not a scientific phenomenon. It is a socially constructed phenomenon. It varies over time and space. Notwithstanding all of this that the social sciences have done, and even some of the hard sciences have done to try to say, you guys are coming up with race, we are not. This is not a scientific phenomenon. Most people, to some degree, hold some biological notion of race deep inside somewhere. And this is not just the older people, you know what I mean, like the generations gone by. No, this is all of us, including our younger people. In fact, recent studies show that teenagers hold biological definitions of race more firmly than others, than younger or more than they do when they get older. You know, something about that teenage period. Some psychologists, sociologists can help us understand that a little bit better. But the bottom line is, it's out there, it's deeply embedded, and research is also showing that there is a correlation between belief in biological definitions of race, right? There's sort of an inverse correlation between that belief and one's interests in social justice or public policy that would ameliorate observed differences among racialized groups. And that kind of makes sense, right? If you believe that it's biological on some level or to some degree, the more you believe that, the more you have a lot of stories that you can tell yourself about how, well, stuff happens in the world because people are different and they're biologically different, and why should we waste resources, right? You all know this stuff. So there's studies that confirm that the unexamined, kind of deconstructed, right? We don't deconstruct enough, we don't put it on the table enough, we don't really go there, is part of what is holding us in place and actually making us lose ground in terms of racial justice. We need to talk about what this topic is, so I do appreciate that from very much. Yes.
And it strikes me that as educators, we need to differentiate for our students between beliefs and the knowledge base, the existing knowledge.
Right. Yes. right, so let me give you guys, oh, I see a hand up over here. Let me get another comment on maybe this one and maybe one more. Yes.
Okay, well, you asked how do contemplative practices
Yes.
allow us to engage in these conversations?
Yes.
I initially started actually writing how I help students, and then added as a teacher to help our students.
Wow.
And it seems to me that in any given room, two or more people,
Yes.
and having conversations about difficult issues like institutionalized racism, heterosexism, sexism, what contemplative practices can do as a teacher is allow me to have my own reactions to whatever is said in the room, which will be there no matter what, right? And it might be pain, it might be anger, it might be trauma, it might be frustration, it might be all those things, without letting that reaction get on the students.
Yes.
Or maybe let it get on the students, but explain how, why, frame it, right? Let it be in the room. And also recognize and help, this is the key part, also help the students recognize that people are coming to this conversation at such different stages in their journey.
Yes.
That we need to allow room not only to have those reactions be in the room, but make sense of those reactions.
Yes.
Because if we just react, then we're just reproducing the cycle of violence. We have to be able to make sense of it. And that is one of the things that I think some social justice movements have not been able to do effectively, that I think contemplative movements can bring to us.
Right.
But not if contemplative movements are not willing to engage in conversations about diversity.
Right. So much that you said worth amplifying. Let's move to, let's get some other questions or comments on the table without me taking up that space. Yes, thank you for that.
I want to offer, I want to add as my friend here as well, but I want to offer that as I'm sitting, as other people here, and it's just struck me, even in the last few minutes, one of the things that can be so difficult and complicated about this important subject is how quickly, when we hit that moment that Beth's talking about, where it starts to become uncomfortable, how quickly we move to theory and up in the head, and I want to really appreciate the point that she made, that it's really uncomfortable, and whether it's anthropologically, biologically, the reality or not, which frankly, there's not much debate about anymore.
Except that for some reason people debate it.
I suppose the most important thing about it, at least for people interested in contemplative things and mindful things, is that the idea has real consequences, and those consequences vary based on how we appear and how other people read us and see us, and
yes.
So there was a shift just now that I want to push back to us being back here on the topic that we're talking about, because I really resonated with your story about how it felt in the room for students who have never had it happen, and I too have never had these things happen, and what it feels like the first time we're in a room where you find out that what you thought was true of everybody isn't true.
Right.
And to just sit with that.
And it's not just happening to those people out there, but these people that you know and like and appreciate.
And just hurt together.
Yeah, we just hurt together. Thank you very much. And I only just like to say this. Part of what I see as I work with this is the challenge of really broadening our capacity to hold all of these things that we're talking about, every single strain of it. The intellectualization of it, as well as the compassionate open-heartedness of it. All of it is a part of it, especially for those of us who are in academic settings. And I want to just really sort of set the stage for the time we have here together for underscoring that however you enter into this, it's accepted here. We are, you wouldn't be here if you didn't care deeply about the work you're doing in your classroom. So I think, for me, part of a contemplative approach to this is developing our own capacity to be mindfully with each other, which means sitting even with the piece of the story that isn't right on what me, might think is the most important thing that we need to be talking about right? How can we model to our students the capacity to listen to another person's point of view? If we start getting triggered, that, so again, we're all human and we're all in it together. Thank you for that, for being here. One last, and then we'll kind of try to get us wrapping up so we can get out. Yeah.
The words that come to me are intimacy and vulnerability. Contemplative practices, when we can create that container in our classroom, enable us and enable our students, and when we show our vulnerability, to open up the doors to a kind of intimacy that we aren't used to, but then to also normalize that connection to other people, that we actually really care that our colleagues have been racially profiled, and that it makes us sad or angry. And that's really what one-on-one intimate relationship is about. And that's, to me, when social justice becomes real.
And might I also just say, I think it's where whatever this human experience of, and now we have a tiny bit metaphysical, because we can here, right? That human spiritual, embodied spiritual experience, for me anyway, again, I have a kind of very heart-based contemplative practice. It really does make itself most known in those moments when we can commune with each other, genuinely listen to each other, and appreciate the common humanity in the room, right? Dan and I had a little bit of a talk about being a little bit vulnerable and sharing what's going on in our lives. We were talking about this talk last night, and we're talking about, I told him that it's not uncommon for me to have someone say to me, in fact, it's pretty darn common to have someone say to me, they'll hear a little bit about my story and they'll say, your parents must be extremely proud of you. Right? Have we heard this, or maybe something? It's not right, I know. It's not necessarily bad, right? It's not necessarily bad. We talk about, right? We have rich, we're always trying to bring the contemplative, let's hold it fully, right? We know this is a well-meaning comment, right? This is a well-meaning comment. But yet you're reacting to what comes up.
I'm just cringing that someone would say that, but
well,
it's well-meaning.
Yes, and I don't even cringe. It's like I just sort of noted with Dan that when that happens, it often feels as if there's something more that the person would like to say, and yet they don't know how to name that, say that. That's the safe thing to say, right? It's a safe thing to say, gosh, I'm imagining your parents, I don't know where they are, what they look like, what their backgrounds are, but I'm having an imagined emotional experience that your parents somewhere are proud of you, because I don't know how to say. My God, just looking at you, I think, perhaps I might want to say, I think there's hope in America that I didn't have before. What? You're a law professor somewhere? You're this little petite woman after that, I don't know what else they might want to say, but they don't say it. People don't say what else might be attaching to it. And they just say that, and you're like, you don't know what to say. It's fine. I mean, we could go on and on about that. But the point is, yes, we do have different experiences. Dan, right, and I share this, he said to me, I've never once had anybody look at me and say, in that same way, your parents must be really proud of you. Right? And again, it's not to say that there isn't a history and your probabilities and all that. It's rational to understand that. But my point is this, not to shame anybody around any of that. My point is this, to challenge, myself. First, I told Dan, I never say anything but the most gracious thing I can think of when someone says it. Like, I'm never like, I can't believe that person said that to me. I'm only just at, 45 years of age, trying to, actually be able to name for myself that when that happens to me, and again, it happens very frequently, that I wish I could somehow have a more genuine communication with the person about what's behind that for them and for what, what's coming up for me, and, let it actually be an opening into something more real than this kind of structured thing that just sits there. That's why I think we're here. We know that contemplative engagement in the world can help us develop even more. We obviously are all wonderful human beings who would be in this room. But develop even more, right, our capacities for rich, meaningful, intimate, real, honest respectful, compassionate communion with each other. Communion in this one, as far as we know, who knows, but one precious life on earth that we have. Let me just move us through, because I know we're going to run out of time if I don't.
Excuse me, what do you say to people when they say that to you? I hear you're
Okay. Oh, here you go.
But
I thank them. First of all, when I say, my mom kind of doesn't have any idea what I do, but in a way she's completely compelled, as it happens. I don't necessarily go into this, but some folks in the room have heard me tell a little bit of my story. Most of you haven't. I did grow up in a family which was poor, under-resourced, whatever the vogue is, and that. Economically challenged. I feel like we're poor anymore. And in the South, I was born in North Carolina to a family where my grandmother had been called into the Christian ministry. So I do think that one of the reasons why I can speak to you from a sense of some sense of truth and rightness of our being here and our talking in this way about these issues is because I witnessed my grandmother practically, I would say basically illiterate, right? Went to school to her first grade, cleaned houses for this family called the Outlaws. I don't know what, yeah, the Outlaw family. Intriguingly enough. 6 days a week, she's cleaning for the Outlaws. Only later, I would ask, who has a house and he's cleaning 6 days a week? It's the South, right? That means we've seen it in the health if we didn't see it in our own lives, right? But I came from that. So yes, in a certain way, absolutely. Many people are proud, right, of me in a certain way. But the point is that, first of all, not all African Americans have that kind of a narrative. And many people sometimes think. In fact, I thought when I went to the University of Virginia that all the other black students would have that kind of a narrative. Whoa, they did not. They did not. So it's really a lot of unpacking, right? I just say thank you, and I don't go into my story usually. Or sometimes I say, the most recent time that it happened, I said something like, yes, I think so. And my real struggle right now, because I was talking to another contemplative person actually who said that. Even though I knew him, of course. I said my own struggle is to see if I can be proud of myself if I'm living authentically the life that I think I was born to live. Really is what I'm grappling with right now. My mom has the pictures and the diplomas and this and that. And for me, it's a question of, am I living in some integrity every day? That seems to me a more important question now. So here we are. I mean, there are many different ways, and I want to collect your cards because I want to know what you guys think about this, of course. And I want to just put up some of the notes, working hypotheses that have come to me in the work that I've done. Certainly these pedagogies promote deepening insight and identity-safe learning. And I use that as opposed to multicultural because that's a word that's a little bit fraught. We need to unpack that quite a bit. But identity-safe, meaning whoever you are, wherever you are, there's a capacity to gauge the level of who's safe, who's included, right? What needs to happen to make everybody's voice matter here? Whether we're talking about a white male in a race class, which is for a particular semester disproportionately minority, how identity safe is it for that person to speak, right? Or by contrast, my torts class, which is 110 students and disproportionately white. Is that space identity safe? And how can these practices help us? Support us by developing intrapersonal awareness for ourselves and our students. That's just, who am I? How can I regulate my emotions better? What are my thoughts? What am I making of my thoughts? What stories am I attaching to my thoughts when someone says this or that? All of that, right? And then, of course, situated interpersonal awareness, which flows from that, right? What's going on with me? What's going on with me with you, right? How can I kind of more deeply get myself out of the way and be with you in this moment? Inclusivity and relational resilience seems to flow very naturally from those practices deeply practiced together in the classes that I've taught for sure. And by inclusivity, I think we're going to be unpacking that over the course of this weekend together. Tomorrow's efforts together will help us with that, and a range of different ways we can think about what that means. But relational resilience, because isn't that really what we want? Some capacity to communicate with each other about our truths without the fear that me saying to you, your parents must be so proud of you, that you're never going to speak to me again, right? That's where the effort to be gracious comes from. I recognize that however somebody may say something that doesn't land exactly with me how they might want it, there's a compassion that grows from these practices for me, such that I can unpack with you guys later how I wish we could have done this and that. But in the moment with that person, be another human being with some compassion. Thank you for that. Yes, it's true. There is a lot of pride in my family about this. And then do the other unpacking somewhere else. So, because ultimately, I've grown to the degree, and I won't say that I was always this way, and I won't say I don't have many more places to grow, right? Work in progress over here. But I know that I'm more able today to be a space that's safe for people to make mistakes around than I used to be. Right? That's what I think these practices can help us become. A space where it's actually okay for you not to be perfect. Neither am I. So and to me, again, at the end of the day, as human beings in relatedness, inevitable relatedness, human projects in the world, is that not really, I mean, we obviously want stress and peace, and we all never want a bad day again, and, right, we want to be all of that. But really, we want a way of being with each other that holds. A way of being with each other that can withstand the truth, the inevitable conflicts that come up with any two people who are in the room. I think it was Beth over here who said any two people. I think as any one person in the room, you got the conflicts in your head. Wait, I really want to do this. No, we want to do this. Oh my gosh, right? Conflict is endemic in the human experience, right? So developing a relational resilience with yourself, obviously, is helped by these practices. But obviously, again, it's about how we can be with each other. And then this multiple perspective based, I know that's a lot mouthful, right? But again, this research shows us we do develop over time this greater capacity to take other people's perspectives for a minute, drop our story for a minute, put ourselves in the shoes of this student who's had the gun drawn on them, when I thought that was just a story that black people made up. Actually, it happens, and then to have the professor say, almost every class, I have black men tell the class that in their truth. It's eye-opening for people, and yet, again, that's a step. The capacity to sort of put your story aside just long enough to hear that, again, permits this reperception. Like it can help you reperceive. I just sat through criminal law, students will say. I just took a whole criminal law class. We were told we couldn't talk about race. We never hardly talked about it. Even though almost every case, many, many cases, dealt in some way or another with a racialized, well, all the subjects were racialized, whether they were minoritized, racialized as a minority person or white or dominant or what, how they were racialized is the question. But race could not be talked about in most, in fact, none of the criminal law professors at my school, God bless them, I love these, they're my family, my faculty family, right, compassion. But they do not do this in their classes. So the students come to my class saying, oh my God, now I understand some aspects of criminal law. I understand some of the struggles that the court's dealing with, the intersection with con law, constitutional law. I'm reperceiving these core knowledge and skills and the values that are running through law all the time and in composition from sitting with it in this way. So, yes. I'm just going to put some of the reflections that some of the students, some of you have seen some of this. I was honored to give a webinar where I talked about some of this, and so some of you may have, if you saw that webinar, you've seen some of these comments. These are just some of the reflections from some of the students from one semester's class, and I just pulled some from one on the slide here, but it just gives you a sense of the kinds of ways, and again, very diverse population of students, giving these kinds of reflections on how this class impacted them. let me move to a little bit of where are some of those particular students whose faces, you know, who gave me the permission to have them beam out at you in the photo. Where are some of them now? I'm just going to say one, for example, practicing immigration law on behalf of Latino non-citizens, right? Hard stuff. The stuff that I happened to be with a group of lawyers. I know I'm out of time. Last week, this time, I was presenting to a group of 100 or so lawyers in Seattle on mindfulness, not on race, just mindfulness in law, because I've written and spoken a lot about that, worked with lawyers with them quite a bit. And one immigration lawyer tearfully told of her struggle to non-attach to her cases involving clients like the ones that one of my students is representing every day, who are getting deported with their children left behind. So here we are, I'm talking to her about some research I've done where lawyers say, with mindfulness, I can go to court, make my arguments, and not attach to the results. Right? And that is what people say, and it's true to a degree. But what she said, in truth, she laughed out loud. Just as you did, right? In her way, right? Great. And I said to her, just as I did, well, tell me what's behind it. And she told this story of, I've been representing these clients and trying to do it mindfully for years. I'm attached. When I go to court and fight for somebody to be kept here and not separated from their child, or after being, you know, picked up overnight and spirited away, hours away from their children with no representation, really. When I go to fight for them to stay, I'm attached. And I hold on to them, and when I think of them being spirited away, as many of them have been more under the Obama administration, as it happens, than any other previous president, despite all the ways in which Obama has tried to do some different things that are valuable, this is an area which troubles a lot of people. So again, a student in the trenches. This is the hard stuff. This is where issues of social justice are there. You don't have to bring them in. They're there. I have one of my students from Humble USF teaching law. And now we're meeting next week so he can better focus his class to make it more like this. He, again, moved to find a way into teaching and to find a way to bring these issues in. Many of them raising multiracial, multicultural, whatever you mean by that, multi-something, right? Families where all these issues are right there at the dinner table, right? Whether through biologically their own children or children they've adopted. That group of students is really quite phenomenal in that regard. All right, let me just say this about this last challenge. It's already something that I know you wouldn't be here if you weren't doing to some degree, so I won't belabor it. How do we further reimagine education? Stepping back again from the trees of our own work, seeing the beautiful mosaic, the forest, the powerful, courageous, crazy, revolutionary potential implications of what this work can say about what education is about. We know that, you know, I love Arthur and Hal's work. There are many people who've been talking about how these practices are really deeply grounded in deep traditions of what it means to educate that we've gone away from. And I think that's true. And I think in the sort of this era that we call postmodern, for lack perhaps of a better word, there definitely are ways that what we're doing profoundly reconceptualizes what education is about, draws on some deep humanist historical roots going all the way back to Socrates and others, but also is profoundly new. You know, is really about accountability, presence, vulnerability, inner and outer together in ways that Socrates wasn't quite doing either. Okay? So that call, right, to courageously experiment moves into, for me, a call for us to see the leader in all of us. And I know, again, you probably wouldn't be here if you weren't already in touch with that. But we can do more. There are leadership opportunities for all of us. Because I do think what we're doing and what we're saying is important enough, you know, as humbly as I can say that from this side of the podium. I do think that it is important enough that where there's a call for leadership, we should think about being there. I mean, not all of us can do that at all times, but we should realize the importance of what we're doing and the way we can help other folks just get a different, deeper understanding of what we're about in the classroom. With respect and with humility and with appreciation, gratitude, I thank you. anybody has any comments, questions before we leave, and I definitely want to get cards from folks. So please, if you want to fold them over because you don't necessarily want everyone to see, or me to see right away, whatever, you know, pass them to me or hand them to me. Pass them down if you would. But before we leave, anybody, you have a hand up over here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had an experience in graduate school, and I'm getting my degree in fine arts, master's in fine arts, where I had a professor who engaged us with this conversation in a number of ways. Some of them were in showing slides of racial profiling and what race is this person, what race is this person, and confronting us with this in a class that was probably 60% white. And the best question in that, although it is kind of pointed and it does get kind of sticky because people could take it offensively, was to address stereotype and then to ask everyone in the room to share first what it means to be white. What is whiteness?
Yes, yes, yes.
And so then we had really interesting confrontations with myself growing up in rural America, having to stop and think, oh, interesting, I'm not just what it is, I'm part of this.
Yes. And
there are these stereotypes that maybe aren't necessarily construed as bad. Some of the ones that came up were they have lawns that they tend to, that they water. They have pets that they can feed. You know, and it was interesting to stop and reflect on what that said about class and wealth that most of us hadn't considered.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much. Totally agree. Yes.
I wrote on the card, but I just want to say that in answer to the question you asked earlier, it seems that contemplative practice really allows us to get in touch with our own emotional selves. I mean, what you did tonight and what you're inviting us to do in our classroom is to have that kind of emotional strength to be able to sit with the discomfort. That, you know, you just can't do the work you're talking about without that ability to sit there and quake in your boots.
Yes. And stay.
And stay. And I think that's what contemplative practice can give to us as we go forward. And the compassion. Really important.
There was a couple of comments about this sort of dichotomizing between the contemplative approach and the intellectual approach. And I'm just suggesting that I think the contemplative approach is big enough, or it ought to be big enough, to bring to intellect. So if we can stay in a contemplative place while we're having intellectual discussions, the nature of those discussions change, the nature of the concepts and the relationships change, as opposed to saying, oh, you know, we're contemplative, now we're going to be intellectual. Right. We actually maintain that throughout.
I love that idea of not buying into the dichotomies that are so prevalent. Thank you.
Yeah, sort of to piggyback, I think one of the problems I've seen in university education is it does tend to be this, you know, them and them and them and them. Even if you're trying to understand, there's still all these groups and differences. The differences are accentuated rather than, you know, I think when we do come into a contemplative place and we are with ourselves and our emotions and our feelings, we also recognize that this is something we all share. So it's not only just experiencing those feelings, but experiencing what we all share together and the tremendous connection, interconnection. And I think it's that experience that we want our students to have, because it's through that they will begin to feel that commonality whoever.
Yes, thank you for that very much. Yes.
I just have a comment. I was very drawn to your idea of storytelling. And I can't think of how I started my undergraduate class this semester, and it was sort of one of those intuitive things. But instead of introduce yourself, it was tell me how you've come to be in this place in this time. And it's a very multicultural class. And we were maybe 3 students in, and they were in tears. Just because it was such a different, instead of introduce yourself to your neighbor, it was more of a why are you here? And so I think as educators, we need to open that space because they're looking for it. They're looking to walk through those doors. So we just need to open it right away.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, see, let me just go down this road and go around this way. Yes, over here, sir.
Touched on it a little bit when you're working with students, a diverse group of predominantly whites.
Yeah.
how do you create an awareness of privilege that's not at the expense of students that already have experienced oppression?
Already experienced oppression.
Not teach about privilege at the expense of students who have not experienced privilege?
Yes, yes. Well, part of it is recognizing that, you know, for me anyway, with classes like this, it is a collective experience. They are helping to teach each other. And so it's about what can we learn from each other about our different locations around this concept of privilege, but also really unpacking what privilege for me anyway is. It means acknowledging that as a, say, a hetero or somebody who's, through my life to this point, I've identified and been a heterosexual woman. I have certain privileges that are attached with that, right? And as a person who has never been suspected to be not in this country legally, I have certain privileges that are attached to that. So even though in certain circumstances I have the disadvantages that come from racial subordination, I know what I can think about what privilege means from that other point, that other node. So I think it's really unpacking and giving it time to really understand that everybody matters. Everybody has something that can help the other person, the person sitting next to them, learn something, right? We can all, and that's why, again, I really appreciate and humbly engage with this group of folks who gets that, who can share. So I'd love to, over the course of the next 2 days, hear more of your comments and questions and more of your cross-sharing about your best practices and things that have worked. So again, I'm not the only expert by any, I'm not even an expert. We're all, right, struggling to develop our expertise around this. And yes, some of us have been working more pointedly on it than others, but we can learn from each other over the next day or so, and I hope we will. I saw another hand up here, yes.
I was thinking you had a comment that came out quickly. You said, well, they're bringing this thing up and it's not even on the lesson plan, and I have to get back to my lesson plan.
Yes.
And I wrote on my little card here, perhaps it's time to rethink the lesson plan. And I really want to talk about it specifically in terms of learning objectives, which cover a huge wide arc, versus these drilled down lesson plans that follow a weekly course. Because what ends up happening is that the classroom privileges the quick thinker and the quick speaker, which is not exactly contemplative, right? It's the person who can get the idea out really quickly. And sometimes these very, very difficult topics don't come out right the first time.
Right.
They need to settle in, they need to be journaled on, they need to be processed, they need to have a space. We need to create a space for that thing that didn't feel so good this Tuesday to come back again next Tuesday and maybe 3 Tuesdays hence.
Right.
And we as teachers have to create room for that rather than just saying, well, you know, on the 23rd I have to teach.
Exactly, you know? Exactly. I mean, good, thank you for that. With the Center for Teaching Excellence, one of the things I'm doing is reading a bunch of current books on how learning works. In fact, there's one called How Learning Works, and I'm going to reference right here. It talks, there's a chapter in there about creating an inclusive classroom climate. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a thing that we as teachers need to put on our agenda, right? How do we start the class and finish the semester with the kind of effort to create the kind of climate that enables this sort of thing to happen? You know, that takes work, but that's, you know, worthy. And not just worthy objective, like morally, you know, wow, I feel better about myself. Education specialists, learning specialists are telling us over and over again, that's how our students are going to learn better. That's how all of our students learn. Don't we, in the 21st century, need a recommitment to how does every student get the absolute most they can out of that classroom? So creating that culture matters pedagogically in ways that we need to recognize. And I'm mindful of the time, so shall this be the last bit, or how should we do this? Or should we just say, folks have to leave, we totally...
I'll talk to you afterward, it's okay, you don't have to.
No, what should we, let me just check. What do you think, Dan? We'd like to have, yes, this one.
Yeah, so how can we have these conversations more often if you're teaching a subject like math? Like, I've seen humanities, in humanities, as long as you have the will, I feel like there's room. In math, it's like, I have to be like, okay, we're not talking about polynomials now. Now we're going to talk about the only one person of color in the room. You know, like, how do you... one or no people of color in my classrooms. And I feel like that everybody knows that we're not talking about that. And school is very open and very trying, but the issue is still there.
Thank you for that. And first of all, math, hard STEM folks in the room, and Dan, you had a comment that I thought was very apropos.
No, wait, just like your comment already says it all in the example you provided.
Really? Like
Which by contextualizing it in the one student of color in your class. That would be, of course, like in a math, I'm not going after you right now in any kind of way, don't worry.
No, yeah,
but like just that already is a place, and the reflection is the teacher. You're asking about a teacher, but as a student, the inquiry has already been placed in you. So to look around and take the moment to see what you're doing in that moment and what's around. You see what I'm saying? So that in the class, you said you gave in unprompted, you gave the one student of color in the class, as if that would be, of course, a natural phenomenon. In a math course, there would be one student of color.
Or maybe she was saying that is the reality of her life.
Then to have that awareness and reflection around how does that come to be?
No, but I can have the reflection, but how do I bring that to the classroom and to the student who's probably doing all the I don't know what? You know?
Do you guys cover probabilities in your math class? Fractions and probabilities, that'll work out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to speak directly to that, or another explain? Anybody want any math book? Did you want to speak to it?
I'm not a math.
Oh, okay. But did you want to speak?
I'm an education person. I mean, one possible way to speak to that is through the lens of education and how, and opening people's hearts by talking about children. And so in the K-12 public system here, children of color are not encouraged across most subjects, but especially not in math and science, right? And so their worth and intelligence is constantly devalued. And so one way to talk about it is just looking at the system in our country and how education is so unequal, and how it is that you're teaching, I'm assuming, at the university level.
No, I'm teaching high school.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about then. But that it starts in pre-K. You know, the ways that we have tracking systems. And that's a way to start talking about math and science in terms of racial inequality.
Thank you for that. Let me only say, I mean, as a person, many people have probably had that experience of being the only someone.
Yes.
Right?
Can I speak to that?
If you want to speak to this one?
Yeah. We need to stop breaking things down into their components. If you look at it from interpretive discourse, math is philosophy. And so what you're really teaching your students is how to see their role in the world, and how to think logically, and how to understand reactions. So if you're teaching them not numbers and formulas and memorizing, but if you're teaching them the philosophy of math, the language of math, then they will see these injustices in the world. And they will understand that from a deeper philosophical perspective, because math is not any different than teaching the humanities. It's just a language in a different way, and a way of thinking. So what we really need to teach is how to think deeply and critically, so that we really look at what is at the heart of education. Okay, that makes sense.
So, I'm like now the facilitator in the like, I love it. First of all, I love that we're having this deepening conversation about this particular issue. I feel like we could have an hour or long, we could spend a lot of time on this, and yet I'm also mindful of the fact that it's getting late. So let's say this. Here we are, right? We have the next day and for the rest of our lives, because we know how to stay in communication with each other, and we got all the technology and many different devices to help us do this. Let us commit now to keeping this conversation going, to tapping the resources that we find here in our midst, and to having the courage, right? To having the courage to speak the truth, to ask the hard questions, and to stay in the game. Thank you, guys.